There is a recent case of the Supreme Court. There is a recent case penned by the Supreme Court, which was, it was just recently uploaded. The case of Marie Claire Ruiz versus People, 2024 October. It was just recently uploaded. In that case, accused Marie Claire Ruiz was charged with a crime of homicide for having killed her best friend, Paulita. When Marie Claire Ruiz, the accused, was arraigned, she pleaded not guilty. Based on the evidence presented the accused Marie Claire and the said victim, Paulita, were very close friends. They lived together in the same rented room. They attended mass together, do things together, read the Bible together. Later, they joined the so-called born-again Christian church. And they were anointed with oil. And allegedly, they developed healing ability. The accused, Marie Claire, and her best friend, the victim, Paulita, began praying the novena. And while praying the novena, they started fasting. They would only eat biscuits and would drink water. And every day, every night, Marie Claire and Paulita would perform the deliverance of the deliverance of the demons. They perform deliverance of the demons ritual. Allegedly, during the said ritual, deliverance of the demons, allegedly Claire felt that she was possessed by a demon. Allegedly, Claire saw 13 devils on the head of Paulita. And later on, she heard a voice commanding her to kill Paulita because Paulita is a devil. And Marie Claire obeyed the voice. According to Marie Claire, the said voice was the voice of Mama Mary. Mama Mary was instructing her to put a cross on the hand and to put her hand inside the mouth of Paulita. And so because of that, Claire held Paulita, whom to his sight looked like a demon with a horn. He held Paulita and he pounded Paulita a number of times on the floor. He pounded the head of Paulita, which to his sight is a demon with a horn, on the floor. Thereafter, when her best friend Paulita was lying on the floor, Claire placed his hand inside the mouth of Paulita. At that precise moment, the landlady arrived. And the landlady saw that both of them were naked and that Paulita is already dead. They were trying to remove the hand of Marie Claire on the mouth of Paulita. However, Marie Claire was too strong and they could not touch her. Minutes later, it was the father of Marie Claire who arrived. When the father heard of the incident, he rushed towards the place of the two friends, Marie Claire and Paulita. Upon reaching the place, the father, upon entering the said room, was shocked. He saw his daughter naked on top of the corpse of the body of her best friend Paulita, who was lying on the floor. And Marie Claire had stuck her hand and fingers inside the mouth of Paulita. When the father called on Marie Claire, Marie Claire looked at the father, which according to the father, the eyes were nanlilisik. And Paulita kept on reciting prayers. Paulita became hysterical. Because of this, he was brought to the National Mental Institution, National Mental Health Care Center. And she was diagnosed to be suffering from schizophrenia with paranoid. And so the defense raised charge with a crime of homicide. The defense raised was insanity. Well, insanity free, Marie Claire Ruiz from criminal liability, Supreme Court said yes. Supreme Court said, here it is evident that the accused was insane at the time of the commission of the crime. According to the Supreme Court, in the en banc case of People versus Pana, the Supreme Court crafted three-way tests to determine whether the defense of insanity, whether the defense of legal insanity is meritorious. And these three-way tests to determine the presence of legal insanity are, first, the insanity must be present at the time of the commission of the crime. Second, the insanity, which is the primary cause of the criminal act, must be medically proven. And third, the effect of the insanity is the inability to appreciate the nature or the wrongfulness of the act. In this case, the Supreme Court said the accused was able to satisfy all the said crafted three-way tests to determine the presence of legal insanity. Supreme Court said the first and the third tests were satisfied when the father said and the police officer who were the first to the crime scene, when they testified that based on the accused's demeanor, reaction, and overt acts immediately after the killing of the said friend, it reveals that the said accused was not in her real mind. Based on what the father saw, when they reached the place, the accused was praying over the bloodied corpse of her friend, with her hand stuck inside the mouth of the friend, and the accused, with eyes nanlilisik, was chanting, "This is the new Jerusalem. We will all be safe." Accused did not even recognize her very own father. She shouted back at her father. Her eyes were nanlilisik. Therefore, the first and the third tests were proven. The second test was also satisfied through the expert testimony of the doctor who said that based on their examination, during and after the commission of the crime, the said woman was suffering from a mental condition known as schizophrenic paranoid type. Supreme Court said legal insanity as an exempting circumstance is proven in this case based on the testimony of the witnesses and based on the testimony of the psychiatrist, based on the testimony of the doctor himself. Hence, the said accused was acquitted from criminal liability by reason of legal insanity. However, she was held to be civilly liable and also imposed with moral damages. In this case, the Supreme Court said, while legal insanity exempts the offender from criminal liability, this will not stop at simply exempting her from imprisonment, because the law provides that she has to be brought to mental confinement. So although she is acquitted from criminal liability by reason of this exempting circumstance of insanity, the law mandates the court to order her to be brought to the mental institution. In this case, Supreme Court further stated, according to the Solicitor General, that Marie Claire was suffering from schizophrenic paranoid type, was only diagnosed after the commission of the crime. Therefore, that is not the insanity. There was no existing records that prior to that, he was already mentally unstable. Supreme Court said, the office of the surgeon is wrong. Supreme Court said, lack of prior psychiatric records should not be taken against the accused who pleads the defense of legal insanity. Having a documented history of a psychiatric condition is not and should never be an element required to prove legal insanity. Prior psychiatric records could not establish the presence of insanity at the time of the commission of the crime. It suffices that there were doctors, there were expert witnesses, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists who testified that at the time of the commission of the crime, this accused was insane. And the doctors indeed testified to that effect. Therefore, the said accused is acquitted, exempted from criminal liability, although she incurs civil liability. Another important exempting circumstance under Article 12, under paragraphs 2 and 3 of Article 12, we have minority. Question is, what is the effect of minority on the criminal liability of an offender? The effect of minority on the criminal liability of the offender is provided for under Section 6 of RA 9344, the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act as amended. Under Section 6 of RA 9344, a child 15 years or under at the time of the commission of the crime shall be totally exempt from criminal liability regardless of discernment. A child above 15 but below 18 at the time of the commission of the crime shall likewise be exempt from criminal liability unless he acted with discernment. If he acted with discernment, he shall be prosecuted in court. So, the moment you see in the bar problem that the accused is a minor and the age of the minor is 15 years old or under, that accused is totally exempted from criminal liability by reason of his minority at the time of the commission of the crime, regardless of discernment. It is immaterial whether he acted with discernment or not, the moment the said accused is 15 years old or under 15 years old. However, if the said accused is above 15 but below 18, he's still a minor, but he is already above 15 but below 18. It is now material to determine discernment. If the said accused above 15 but below 18 acted without discernment, he is still exempted from criminal liability. But if he acted with discernment, then he shall be prosecuted in court. He shall be held criminally liable. He can be prosecuted in court, and if proven, can be held criminally liable. What if X and Y are brothers? X and Y saw Z coming. X and Y were on this side of the road, and they saw Z coming on the right side of the road. X and Y were mad at Z. For the longest time, X and Y had been courting Z to join their rugby boys gang. But for the longest time, Z would always refuse to be part of their rugby boys gang. And so X and Y blocked the path of Z. Z at the time was with his cousin W. X and Y blocked the path of Z, and they told Z, Z, for the last time, we are asking you, please join our rugby boys gang. But Z answered, X and Y, for the last time, I am telling you, I am not joining your rugby boys gang. Upon hearing this, X and Y became very mad. X and Y suddenly began hitting Z. They kept on punching Z. And for every punch, in the face, in the neck, in the body of Z, Z would bleed. Reason? The fist of X and Y had brass knuckles. So for every punch, Z would be bleeding. Z was now down on the ground. His cousin W begged X and Y to stop, otherwise Z might die. Upon hearing that, Y went at the head of Z. X remained on the legs of Z, while X was holding the legs of Z. While X was holding the legs of Z, Y strangled the neck of Z. Z died. X and Y were about to leave, but they turned on. They looked at the witness W. X and Y warned W, if we learned that you reported this incident to the authorities, you will be next. We will be coming to you, and you will have the similar fate. And then thereafter, X and Y left. At the time of the commission of the crime, X is 14 years old. Y is 16 years old. They were both arrested, and they were charged as co-conspirators for the crime of homicide. If you are the judge, how will you rule on this case? Insofar as X is concerned, since he was only 14 years old at the time of the commission of the crime, the judge should outrightly, immediately dismiss the case. Reason is, under Section 64 of RA 9344, the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act, the law categorically provides that in cases of children 15 years old and below at the time of the commission of the crime, it shall be immediately dismissed. In this case, X was only 14 years old at the time of the commission of the crime. Therefore, the case of homicide filed against him must be immediately dismissed based on the express provision of Article 64 of RA 9344. What about the case of homicide against Y, who was 16 years old? Since Y was above 15 but below 18, you have to determine the presence of discernment. Based on the facts of the case, Y acted with discernment. Y warned W, the witness. If you will report us to the authorities, you will be next. You will have the same fate. Therefore, Y has discernment that what they did to Z, that killing Z, is an unlawful act, and the moment the authorities will learn about it, they would be punished. Hence, Y acted with discernment. Since Y, who at the time of the incident was above 15 but below 18, acted with discernment, the case, insofar as he is concerned, must proceed in court. What if? So, Y is prosecuted in court for the crime of homicide. After trial, the judge found him guilty. At the time of the promulgation of judgment, Y is 17 years old, still a minor. The judge prioritized the case because Y is a minor, and just after a year, here now is the promulgation of judgment, the judge finding Y guilty beyond reasonable doubt of the crime of homicide. What is the duty of the court? Under Section 38 of RA 9344, the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act, the law expressly provided once the child who is under 18 years of age at the time of the commission of the crime is found guilty for the offense charge, the court shall determine and shall ascertain the civil liability arising from and based on the crime committed. However, instead of pronouncing the judgment of conviction, the court shall place the child in conflict with the law under suspended sentence without need of application. So in this case, since at the time of the promulgation of judgment wherein the RTC found Y guilty beyond reasonable doubt of the crime of homicide, there shall be no open court pronouncement of his guilt. What the court will pronounce will only be his civil liability arising from the crime committed, but there shall be no pronouncement as to his guilt. Instead, the RTC shall place Y under preventive, under suspended, under suspended sentence without need of application by express provision of Section 38. So the judge, the RTC judge, shall place Y under suspended sentence without need of application. What if, at the time of promulgation of judgment, Y, who was 16 at the time of the commission of the crime, is already 18 years old. He is already an adult. He is already 18 years old at the time of the promulgation of judgment by the RTC. What is the duty of the court? Still, the RTC judge shall place him under suspended sentence without need of application. Under Section 38 of RA 9344, the law expressly provides that the suspension of sentence shall be applied to the child in conflict with the law, even if he is already 18 years of age or more at the time of the promulgation of judgment. Therefore, even if Y is already an adult, 18 years old at the time of the promulgation of judgment, provided that he was a minor at the time of the commission of the crime, he is still entitled to a suspended sentence without need of application. But what if, due to protracted trial, at the time of the promulgation of judgment, Y is already 22 years old? What is the duty of the court? Is Y still entitled to a suspended sentence? This time, no. Under Section 40 of RA 9344, the suspended sentence can only be given and can only be extended until the child in conflict with the law reaches the maximum age of 21 years old. In this case, based on the facts of the case, although Y was 16 at the time of the killing, he was already 22 at the time of the promulgation of judgment. Under Section 40, he is only entitled to a suspended sentence until he reaches the maximum age of 21. Since he is way above 21, he is already 22, Y is no longer entitled to a suspended sentence. So, what is the effect of minority on the criminal liability of Y? In this case, minority shall be considered as a privilege mitigating circumstance which will lower the imposable penalty by 1 degree. So the penalty will be lowered by 1 degree. The penalty for homicide is reclusion temporal. Since he is a minor, you lower it by 1 degree, it becomes prisión mayor. So the effect of minority this time is that it is a privilege mitigating circumstance which will lower the imposable penalty by 1 degree. Likewise, in case of conviction, Section 51 of RA 9344 shall be applied on him. Under Section 51 of RA 9344, in case of conviction of a child in conflict with the law, in lieu of confinement in a regular penal institution, he shall be serving his sentence in agricultural camps and other training facilities that may be established, maintained, supervised, and controlled by the Bureau of Correction in coordination with the DSWD. So in that case, even if Y is convicted, he will not be brought to the National Penitentiary. He will be serving his sentence in agricultural camps and other training facilities established by the Bureau of Correction in coordination with the DSWD. What do you mean by discernment on the part of a child in conflict with the law? What is this so-called discernment on the part of a child in conflict with the law? In the case of People versus ZZZ, in the case of child in conflict with the law XXX versus People, the Supreme Court said discernment is the mental capacity of a minor to appreciate, to consider the consequences of his own. So discernment is the mental capacity, the mental capability of a minor to appreciate, to consider the consequences of his. What are status offenses? Can your local sanggunian approve an ordinance on status offenses? Under sections 57 and 57-A of RA 9344 as amended by RA 10630, status offenses. Any conduct not considered as an offense or not penalized if committed by an adult shall not be considered an offense and shall not be punished if committed by a child. Status offenses includes curfew violation, truancy, parental disobedience, anti-smoking ordinance, anti-drinking ordinance, anti-drinking laws, anti-smoking laws. These are status offenses. These are acts which, if committed by adult, are not penalized. Therefore, if committed by a minor, they shall not also be penalized. Can your local sanggunian enact or pass an ordinance on anti-drinking, anti-smoking, curfew, insofar as minors are concerned? Can they pass ordinance on status offenses? Yes. Based on the amendment brought about by RA 10630. Under Section 57-A of RA 9344, as amended by RA 10630, local government units can pass ordinances on status offenses provided they shall be for the protection of the child. They shall be for the protection of children. Therefore, even if there is an ordinance on curfew, an ordinance on anti-drinking, an ordinance on anti-smoking, an ordinance of parental disobedience, yes, they can be enacted. However, they shall be for the protection of children. What does it mean? No penalty shall be imposed on the children for violations of this ordinance. Instead, the children who are arrested shall be brought to their residence and shall be released only to the custody of the parents. Because these ordinances on status offenses, although allowed, shall always be for the protection of the minors. They shall always be for the protection of the children. Another important exempting circumstance under Article 12 is the fourth exempting circumstance. Any person who, while performing a lawful act with due care, causes an injury by mere accident without fault or intention of causing it. This is otherwise known as accident. The elements of accident as an exempting circumstance are first, that the offender is performing a lawful act. Second, that he is doing the said lawful act with due care. Third, that he caused injury to another by mere accident. And lastly, that there is no fault. That there is no fault, no negligence on the part of the said offender. So, when you say accident, it is something that happened outside the sway of things. The offender, while performing a lawful act, causes an injury to another by mere accident. He has no fault. He has no intent. He has no negligence in causing it. That offender shall be exempted from both criminal liability and civil liability. Accident is an exception to the rule that in case of exempting circumstances, there is no criminal liability, but there is civil liability. In case of accident, there is both no criminal liability and also no civil liability. It is more akin to a justifying circumstance. What if A and B were both security guards? So A and B were both security guards. They were seated inside the guardhouse. While A was cleaning his service pistol, B snatched the service pistol of A. And so A tried to get it from B. In the ensuing struggle for the possession of the said service pistol, A succeeded in wresting it from the hand of B. But the pistol exploded, with the bullet hitting the breast of C, another security guard who died as a consequence of the said gunshot. Question. Is A criminally liable for the death of C? A is not criminally liable for the death of C. Since A's service pistol was snatched by B, A was in the lawful exercise of a right in trying to regain its possession. When A succeeded in wresting the pistol from the hand of B and it exploded, the bullet hitting Z, A cannot incur criminal liability because he was performing a lawful act. It was an accident, an exempting circumstance. A was performing a lawful act, trying to get possession of his pistol. He was performing it with due care. There is no other way that he could get it from the possession of B except to wrestle for its possession. In the course thereof, it exploded and another guard C was hit. There was no intent. There was no fault. There was no negligence on the part of A. He was merely exercising a right in trying to regain possession of his pistol. It being an accident, the fourth exempting circumstance under Article 12, A incurs both no criminal liability as well as no civil liability. We go to Article 13. Article 13, we have mitigating circumstances. So let us discuss some important mitigating circumstances under Article 13. When you say mitigating circumstances, there are those circumstances which, if present or attendant in the commission of a felony, would serve to lower the imposable penalty. The penalty is lowered because there is a diminution on the offender's voluntariness in the commission of the crime. So in case of exempting, there is total lack of voluntariness. So it will absolve the offender from criminal liability. However, in case of mitigating, there is only a diminished voluntariness. Therefore, the offender is still criminally liable. However, the penalty will be lowered. The penalty will be mitigated, depending on the kind of mitigating circumstance. There are two kinds of mitigating circumstances. We have ordinary mitigating circumstances and we have privileged mitigating circumstances. An ordinary mitigating circumstance may be offset by a generic aggravating circumstance. If an ordinary mitigating circumstance is not offset by a generic aggravating circumstance, its effect is to lower the penalty to the minimum period of the penalty prescribed by law. On the other hand, a privileged mitigating circumstance cannot be offset by any aggravating circumstance. The effect of a privileged mitigating circumstance is to lower the imposable penalty by at least 1 to 2 degrees. The first mitigating circumstance under Article 13, those justifying circumstances are exempting circumstances when all the elements necessary to justify the act or all the elements necessary to exempt the offender from criminal liability in their respective cases are not attendant. Otherwise stated, we have incomplete justifying circumstance, we have incomplete exempting circumstance. What are the rules? If majority of the elements necessary to justify the act are present, the said incomplete justifying circumstance or incomplete exempting circumstance shall be considered as a privileged mitigating circumstance. If less than a majority of the elements necessary to justify the act are present in the commission of the crime, the incomplete justifying circumstance, the incomplete exempting circumstance shall be considered merely as an ordinary mitigating circumstance. Third rule, if there are only 2 elements necessary to justify the act, only 2 elements necessary to exempt the offender from criminal liability, the presence of 1 element is already considered as majority, hence, it will be considered as a privileged mitigating circumstance. Last rule, In case of incomplete self-defense, incomplete defense of a relative, incomplete defense of a stranger, there must always be the element of unlawful aggression. If only the element of unlawful aggression is present, the incomplete self-defense shall be treated as an ordinary mitigating circumstance. If aside from unlawful aggression, another element is present, then the incomplete self-defense shall be treated as a privilege mitigating circumstance. So what if A is a convict who escaped from the National Penitentiary? There was a police manhunt against A. One day, the police authorities got a tip from a concerned citizen that A is staying in a house in their place. The said tipster gave the name of their province, the name of their barangay, and the exact address where A is staying. So the police officers in full battle gear went out to the said province, to the said barangay, to the said house, in order to serve the warrant of arrest on A. When the police arrived, even before the policeman could enter the yard of B, even before the policeman, could enter the yard of the said house, A was immediately seen by the police officer. A, upon seeing the police officer, immediately entered the house and locked the door. The leader of the policemen called on A. A, you get out of the house. You surrender peacefully. We are many, and your house is already being encircled. Now, you come out, you surrender to us peacefully, and nothing will happen to you. I will count 1 to 3. If you will not surrender peacefully, we are going to enter inside by force, and we will effect the arrest upon you at all cost. So, the leader of the policemen counted 1 to 3. No A came out. And so the police officers barged inside the room of the said house by means of force. The moment they entered the house, they saw A sitting behind a wall, and A was just laughing and laughing at the police officers. The police officers, after breaking the said door of the house, the moment they entered, they immediately shoot the laughing A in rapid succession, by reason thereof, A died instantaneously. The police officers are now being prosecuted for the death of A. They were charged with the crime of homicide for having killed A. But they raised as a defense that they were merely acting in the fulfillment of their duty, which is a justifying circumstance. Question: if you are the judge, will you appreciate the justifying circumstance of fulfillment of duty? In case there is no fulfillment of duty, is there at least a mitigating circumstance of incomplete fulfillment of duty? If you are the judge, you should not appreciate the justifying circumstance of fulfillment of duty in favor of the police. Fulfillment of duty under paragraph 5 of Article 11 has only 2 elements. First, that the accused was acting in the due performance of his duty or in the lawful exercise of a right or office. And second, that the resulting injury is the unavoidable, the necessary consequence of the due performance of his duty. Of these 2 elements, only the first element is present. The police officer went there to serve the warrant of arrest on A. The police officer went there in the performance of their duty to effect the arrest on A, who escaped from the National Penitentiary. So the first element of the justifying circumstance of fulfillment of duty is present. However, the second element is absent. The police said they will effect the arrest. But the moment they barged inside the room of the house, they did not even attempt to arrest A. They immediately fired at A in rapid succession instead of arresting him. Firing at A who was alone and simply laughing is not the necessary consequence of the police officer's due performance of duty. Therefore, the second element of fulfillment of duty is absent. We have the mitigating circumstance of incomplete fulfillment of duty. So as a judge, you will not appreciate the justifying circumstance of fulfillment of duty because the second element is absent. However, since fulfillment of duty has only two elements and one element is present that is already considered as majority, therefore, you should appreciate in favor of the said police officers the privilege mitigating circumstance of incomplete fulfillment of duty, which will lower the imposable penalty by 1 degree. Another important mitigating circumstance is under the second paragraph of Article 13. If the offender is under 18 years of age or over 70 years of age. The moment the accused is over 15 but below 18, his minority is no longer exempting. His minority is considered as a privilege mitigating circumstance which will lower the imposable penalty by 1 degree. The moment the offender is above 70 years old, his seniority will be considered as an ordinary mitigating circumstance, which would mean the lowering of the imposable penalty to the minimum period of the penalty prescribed by law. The next important mitigating circumstance under paragraph 13, we have the third one. I have discussed this earlier. This is praeter intentionem, that the offender has no intention to commit so grave a wrong as that committed. Let us relate it to the fourth mitigating circumstance, that sufficient provocation or threat on the part of the offended party immediately preceded the act. The elements of sufficient provocation as a mitigating circumstance are: first, the provocation must be sufficient. Second, the provocation must originate from the private offended party. And third, the provocation must be immediate to the commission of the crime by the person provoked. These are the elements of sufficient provocation. So what if X and Y are co-employees? X and Y are co-employees. They were both working at the water district. And since it is Friday, the next day is weekend, these employees of the water district has a drinking spree. So nagiinom sila. And when all of them were already tipsy, Y began calling F, sip-sip ka, sip-sip ka sip-sip ka. And so, X confronted Y. Why are you calling me sip-sip? Why is it that whenever you are drunk, you are bullying me? And so because of that, X and Y had a heated altercation. This heated altercation between X and Y ensued into a fight. It ensued into a violent fist fight. In the course thereof, X was losing the fight because X was a smaller man than Y. X was losing the fight when suddenly X gave Y a punch on the right face near the jaw. The said one punch caused Y to topple down. Y fell on the concrete pavement, and Y was brought inside the said office. When Y regained his consciousness, he went home. Since then, Y has been in and out of the hospital until Y died. Because of this, X was charged with a crime of homicide. The judge convicted X of the crime of homicide. If you are the said judge convicting X of the crime of homicide, what mitigating circumstances will you consider in favor of X? You have to consider the mitigating circumstances of praeter intentionem, that the offender has no intention to commit so grave a wrong as that committed, and you have to consider also the mitigating circumstances of sufficient provocation under paragraph 4. This is the case of Urbano versus People. In the case of Urbano versus People, the Supreme Court appreciated both praeter intentionem and sufficient provocation as mitigating circumstances. There is praeter intentionem. X has no intent to kill Y. According to the Supreme Court, X merely landed one lucky punch on the right face, on the right jaw of Y. And because of that one lucky punch, Y became unconscious, was brought to the hospital, and thereafter died. There was a notable disparity between the means employed by the offender, punching the face, and the resulting felony, which is death. No one could have foreseen that out of one lucky punch, death would supervene. Hence, the third mitigating circumstance, praeter intentionem, that the offender has no intention to commit so grave a wrong as that committed, is present. Likewise, there is the presence of the fourth mitigating circumstance, sufficient provocation. The provocation was sufficient. Y has always been calling X sip, 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 sip ka. And this angered Y, confronted X. X confronted Y, and because of this, there was this exchange of fist blows between the both of them. The said provocation came from the victim Y. And the said act of punching the face was right after the provocation. Therefore, all the elements of sufficient provocation are present. This can also be considered in favor of the said accused X. The fifth mitigating circumstance, that the act be committed in immediate vindication of a grave offense to the one committing the felony, his spouse, ascendants, legitimate natural or adopted brothers or sisters, or relatives of affinity in the same degree. The elements are first, that there be a grave offense done to the accused or to his relatives. And second, that be said that it is necessary that the said commission of the crime must be immediate to the commission of the grave offense. The grave offense is the proximate cause of the commission of the said crime. The crime was committed in immediate vindication of the said grave offense. Let us relate it to the six mitigating circumstances, that of having acted upon an impulse so powerful as naturally to have produced passion and obfuscation. The elements of sudden impulse of passion and obfuscation as a mitigating circumstance are first, that there be an act, both sufficient, that there be an act which is sufficient to produce passion and obfuscation, and lastly, the commission of the crime was not far removed from the commission of the act that produced passion and obfuscation by a considerable length of time during which the offender might have recovered his normal equanimity. These are the elements of sudden impulse of passion and obfuscation. So what if X, it was around 6 o'clock in the evening, X was walking towards home, coming from work. X was nearing home already when X heard the very loud cries of his sister asking for help. And so X rushed. He ran as fast as he could. Upon reaching the house, he opened the door. Upon opening the door, he was shocked. He saw their neighbor on top of his sister who was naked and who was struggling. The said neighbor saw X, and the neighbor jumped outside the window. X was so mad. X took his bolo and ran after the said neighbor Y, and thereafter repeatedly hacked Y until Y died. X is now charged with the crime of homicide. X said, no, he cannot be held liable for homicide because he merely acted in defense of the honor and chastity of his sister. His act is justified because he was merely acting in defense of a relative, particularly in defense of his sister's honor. Question: is X defense meritorious? Second question: in case X defense has no merit, can X claim the benefit of any mitigating circumstance? As to the first question, X defense has no merit. The justifying circumstance of defense of a relative is not present because at the time that X hacked Y, the neighbor was already running away after raping the sister. Therefore, the first element of defense of a relative, which is unlawful aggression, is already absent because it has already ceased to exist. Since at the time X hacked Y was already running away, the unlawful aggression of raping the sister has already ceased to exist. The moment the inceptive unlawful aggression commenced by the said victim had already ceased to exist. There is no more reason to wound him. There is no more reason to hurt him. Otherwise, you become the aggressor and you become liable. So in that case, since the inceptive unlawful aggression commenced by the neighbor had already ceased to exist, X act of hacking him, X act of killing him would no longer amount to defense of a relative. His defense has no merit. What about the next question? Can X claim any mitigating circumstance? Yes. X may claim the mitigating circumstance of immediate vindication of a grave offense. All the elements are present. First, Y's act of raping the sister was a grave offense. And second, X's act of killing Y was done in immediate vindication of the said grave offense. Hence, there is the mitigating circumstance of immediate vindication of a grave offense. Another mitigating circumstance which can be claimed by X is sudden impulsive passion obfuscation. All the elements of sudden impulsive passion obfuscation are present. First, Y's act of raping the sister was an unlawful act that produced passionate obfuscation on the part of X, the brother. And second, X's act of killing Y was done immediately after the rape. Therefore, it was not far removed from the commission of the act of rape by a considerable length of time during which the offender might have recovered his normal equanimity. Hence, X may also claim the mitigating circumstance of sudden impulsive passion obfuscation. So X claimed the mitigating circumstances of, first, immediate vindication of a grave offense, and second, sudden impulsive passion obfuscation. Both of them were proven because the elements are present. So, if you are the judge, how will you appreciate these two mitigating circumstances of immediate vindication of a grave offense and sudden impulsive passion obfuscation? If you are the judge, you shall appreciate them only as one mitigating circumstances. As one mitigating circumstance. In a number of cases, in the case of People versus Ignas, in the case of People versus Pagal, and other cases, the Supreme Court said, when the mitigating circumstances of paragraph 4, sufficient provocation, paragraph 5, immediate vindication of a grave offense, paragraph 6, sudden impulse of passion, obfuscation, are all present in the commission of the crime, and they arose from the same facts and circumstances, they shall be treated only as one mitigating circumstance. In this case, two are present. We have immediate vindication of a grave offense and sudden impulse of passion and obfuscation. Since they are both present and they arose from the same facts and circumstances, the victim having raped the sister of the accused, they shall be considered by the judge only as one mitigating circumstance. What if couple, spouses, X and Y, were fighting? Husband X and Y were shouting at each other. They were at the top of their voices. Their children were awakened from their sleep. Their parents were fighting. And so the children went to the sala. And there the children saw their father and their mother, X and Y, fighting, shouting at each other. In the course thereof, the said husband, X, went inside the kitchen. When he came back, he went directly to the wife, Y. And the said husband punched the wife on the face, and thereafter, he hit the wife, he stabbed the wife on the chest, near the breast. The said wife tried to walk towards the door to ask for help, but she collapsed. She died. The children were crying. The neighbors heard the commotion. The neighbors called the police. The police arrived, and the police saw the deceased body of the wife and the husband, who was crying together with the children. The police officers invited the said husband X for questioning at the police station. When the police officers invited the husband to go to the police station, the husband X voluntarily went with the police for questioning. Without any resistance, without any struggle, he voluntarily went with the police to the police station for questioning. Thereafter, after investigation, the husband is charged with the crime of parricide. The husband admitted to the killing of the wife. However, the husband raised the following mitigating circumstances in the act of killing, so as to lower his imposable penalty. The husband raised the mitigating circumstance of sudden impulse of passion, obfuscation. Second, the husband raised the mitigating circumstance of preterintentionem, that he has no intention to commit so grave a wrong as that of killing his wife. And third, the husband raised the mitigating circumstance of voluntary surrender. Question: are these mitigating circumstances raised by the accused husband present? First, the mitigating circumstance of sudden impulse of passion, obfuscation is not present in the commission of the crime. The first element of sudden impulse of passion, obfuscation requires that there must be an act both unlawful and sufficient to produce passion and obfuscation on the part of the accused. Therefore, it is necessary that that feeling of passion and obfuscation on the part of the accused must arise from lawful sentiments. In this case, the quarrel between X and Y, the quarrel between the husband and the wife, no matter how heated, no matter how serious, is not the kind of passion obfuscation contemplated by them. The excitement which is inherent in all persons who quarrel and come to fight does not constitute obfuscation. Hence, this mitigating circumstance of sudden impulse of passion obfuscation is not attendant. What about the second mitigating circumstance raised by the accused? The accused raised the mitigating circumstance of greater intentionem, that he has no intention to commit so grave a wrong as that of killing the wife, that he loves his wife. Will that mitigating circumstance of greater intentionem lie in favor of the accused so as to lower the imposable penalty? No. Based on the facts of the case, there was no notable disparity between the means employed by the husband and the resulting felony parricide. The husband punched the wife and thereafter stabbed the wife in the chest near the breast. Stabbing the wife on a vital part of the body reveals the husband's intent to kill the said wife with the use of a deadly weapon. Just by the use of a knife in attacking the wife, it already reveals intent to kill. More so, the wounds were mortal because the wife was hit in the chest near the breast. Hence, because there was no notable disparity between the means employed and the resulting felony, then the mitigating circumstance of greater intention will not lie in favor of the said husband. The last mitigating circumstance claimed by the husband is voluntary surrender. Is there voluntary surrender? No, there is also no voluntary surrender. The mitigating circumstance of voluntary surrender is also not present. The essence of voluntary surrender as a mitigating circumstance is spontaneity and the intent of the accused to give himself up and to submit himself to the authorities, either because he acknowledges his guilt or he wishes to save the government, to save the authorities, the trouble, the expense that they may incur for his search and capture. In this case, there was no spontaneity on the part of the husband. He was not the one who called the police. He was not the one who surrendered to the police. It was the police who arrived to their place because the police officers were called by the neighbor who heard the commotion and the cries. The act of the husband voluntarily going to the police station upon being invited by the police officers for questioning for investigation does not amount to voluntary surrender. The fact that there was no struggle, the fact that there was no resistance on the part of the husband when he was invited to go to the police station for questioning does not amount to voluntary surrender. Because according to the Supreme Court, in the case of People versus Sabalberino, in the case of People versus Nidera, the voluntariness of one's surrender should denote a positive act and not a mere compliant or submissive behavior in the presence of police authorities. Hence, the said act of acts voluntarily going to the police would not amount to voluntary surrender. Otherwise stated, all the defenses, all the mitigating circumstances raised by the said husband have no merit. We go to the seventh mitigating circumstance under Article 13. Under paragraph 7, we have two mitigating circumstances. We have voluntary surrender and we have voluntary plea. The elements of voluntary surrender as a mitigating circumstance are, first, that the offender has not been actually arrested. Second, that he surrendered to a person in authority or his agent. Third, the said surrender is voluntary in nature. These are the elements of voluntary surrender. The first element, that the offender has not been actually arrested. He is not yet arrested by the police authorities. Second element, what did he do? He surrendered either to a person in authority or to an agent of person in authority. So he surrendered either to the governor, the mayor, the barangay chairman. They are persons in authority. Or he surrendered to the police. The police are agents of persons in authority. And the last element, the said surrender is done voluntarily. Surrender is said to be done voluntarily when it is done spontaneously and unconditionally. The offender surrendered spontaneously, either because he felt remorse, he wanted to plead guilty, or because he wishes to save the government, the time, the energy, the expenses that they will incur if they search and arrest him. These are the elements of voluntary surrender. The other mitigating circumstance under paragraph 7 is voluntary plea of guilt. The elements of voluntary plea of guilt as a mitigating circumstance are first, the plea of guilt must be done spontaneously and unconditionally. Second, the plea of guilt must be done in open court. And lastly, the plea of guilt must be done before the presentation of the evidence for the prosecution. The first element, the plea of guilt must be done spontaneously. A plea of guilt is said to have been done spontaneously when the said plea of guilt is to the original crime charge. If the plea of guilt is not on the original crime charge, then it is not done spontaneously. So what if X was charged with a crime of frustrated homicide? The information alleges that he committed frustrated homicide. During arraignment, X pleaded not guilty. On pre-trial, the counsel of X moved to the court to allow X to enter into a plea bargaining agreement. X wanted to plead guilty to the lesser crime of serious physical injuries. The judge granted the motion, and so X was rearraigned. This time, the information charges X with serious physical injuries. X pleaded guilty to serious physical injuries. After determining the civil aspect of the case, the judge rendered its decision finding X guilty for serious physical injuries. Since X pleaded guilty, can the judge consider it as a mitigating circumstance? No, the judge cannot consider it as a mitigating circumstance because X plea of guilt to serious physical injuries is not done spontaneously. It is not on the original crime charge. The original crime charge is frustrated homicide, but he pleaded guilty only to serious physical injuries based on a plea bargaining agreement. Therefore, X plea of guilt is not done spontaneously. It cannot be considered as a mitigating circumstance. What if X was charged as a principal, a co-conspirator in the crime of robbery? During arraignment, X pleaded not guilty. During pre-trial, the counsel of X moved to the court to allow X to enter into a valid plea bargaining agreement. The counsel said, X is willing to plead guilty to the very same crime of robbery, however, only as an accomplice and not as a principal, not as a co-conspirator. With the consent of the public prosecutor, the judge granted the motion, and so X was rearraigned to the same charge, robbery, but this time, not as a co-principal, not as a co-conspirator, but as a mere accomplice. Thereafter, after providing evidence for the civil aspect of the case, the judge rendered its decision convicting X as an accomplice in the crime of robbery. The judge, however, in imposing the penalty, did not appreciate the mitigating circumstance of voluntary plea of guilt. Is the judge correct? Yes, the judge is correct. Reason is, although X pleaded guilty spontaneously to the crime charge, it is subject to a condition. And that condition is that he be a mere accomplice instead of being a co-conspirator, instead of being a co-principal. Since X plea of guilt was not done without any condition, since X plea of guilt was not done unconditionally, then his plea of guilt is not considered as a mitigating circumstance. What if X came from a party? So X came from a party. He was driving recklessly. X didn't see the pedestrian crossing the lane. X hit the child. The child died. So X is now being prosecuted for reckless imprudence resulting in homicide. During arraignment, so sorry for what he did. So sorry for driving under the influence of liquor and therefore causing the death of a child. X immediately pleaded guilty to the charge of reckless imprudence resulting in homicide. After determining the civil aspect of the case, the judge rendered its decision, convicting X of reckless imprudence resulting in homicide. However, in imposing the penalty, the judge did not consider X's voluntary plea of guilt as a mitigating circumstance. Is the judge correct? Answer, yes, the judge is correct. As held by the Supreme Court in the case of People versus Mariano, in case of quasi-offenses under Article 365, the law expressly provides that in the imposition of penalties, the court shall exercise their sound discretion without regard to the rules prescribed in Article 64 of the RPC. Therefore, by express provision of Article 365, the moment the crime is a quasi-offense under Article 365, in imposing the penalty, judges can either appreciate mitigating or aggravating circumstances depending solely on their sound discretion. They are not mandated to consider mitigating and aggravating circumstances. It depends on their exercise of sound discretion. By express provision of Article 365, Paragraph 5, because they are not mandated to obey the rules prescribed in Article 64 of the RPC. The eighth mitigating circumstance, that the offender is deaf and dumb, blind, or otherwise suffering some physical defect which thus restricts his means of action, defense, or communication with his fellow being. For physical defect to be considered as a mitigating circumstance, it is necessary that there must be a connection between the crime committed and the physical defect, such that the offender's physical defect has restricted his means of action, defense, or communication with his fellow being. Under the last mitigating circumstance in Article 13, that is any other circumstance similar in nature and analogous to those mentioned from paragraphs 1 to 9. What are some of the circumstances? For example, restitution. The return of the thing taken, according to the Supreme Court in the case of Nisurtado versus Sandigan Bayan, is akin to voluntary surrender. In the case of Nisortado versus Sandigan Bayan, the barangay chairman is charged with a crime of malversation of public funds and property. He restituted the amount allegedly malversed. The said restitution, according to the Supreme Court, is akin to voluntary surrender. It is analogous to voluntary surrender, hence it shall be considered as a mitigating circumstance which will lower the imposable penalty of the said public officer charged with malversation. We go to some important aggravating circumstances under Article 14. Under Article 14, aggravating circumstances are those circumstances which, if present or attendant in the commission of a felony, would serve to increase the imposable penalty. However, no matter how many aggravating circumstances attended the commission of the crime, the court cannot impose a penalty beyond the maximum penalty prescribed by law. The maximum penalty prescribed by law is the limit. There are different kinds of aggravating circumstances. We have generic aggravating circumstance. We have specific aggravating circumstance. We have inherent aggravating circumstance. We have special aggravating circumstance. And we have qualifying aggravating circumstance. Generic aggravating circumstances are those which apply to all kinds of crimes. Example, nighttime. Whatever is the crime, if the offender deliberately sought the cover of darkness in order to ensure the commission of the crime, nighttime will be considered as an aggravating circumstance. Then we have a specific aggravating circumstance. For example, we have cruelty. Cruelty can only be appreciated in crimes against persons. For example, treachery. Treachery can only be appreciated in crimes against persons. Then we have the third kind. We have inherent aggravating circumstances. Inherent aggravating circumstances are those which of necessity accompany the commission of the crime. They're considered as ingredients, elements in the commission of the crime. Example of inherent aggravating circumstance, the Supreme Court has ruled evident premeditation is an inherent aggravating circumstance in all crimes against property under Title 10. So in all crimes against property under Title 10, evident premeditation, that is planning before the actual execution of the crime, is an inherent aggravating circumstance. The fourth kind is the so-called special aggravating circumstances. Special aggravating circumstances are those which, if present, would mean the imposition of the maximum penalty prescribed by law. Hence, special aggravating circumstances cannot be offset by any mitigating circumstance. Example of special aggravating circumstance, we have quasi-recidivism. Quasi-recidivism is a special aggravating circumstance by express provision of Article 160 of the RPC. Then we have qualifying aggravating circumstances. Qualifying aggravating circumstances are those circumstances which, if present, will change the nature of the crime to bring about a more serious crime with a higher penalty, or even without changing the nature of the crime, it brings about the imposition of a higher penalty. Example of qualifying aggravating circumstances, we have treachery. It qualifies the killing to murder. From homicide, it becomes murder. We have also abuse of superior strength. We have also ignominy. We have cruelty. We have evident premeditation. These are all qualifying aggravating circumstances because as provided for under Article 248 for the crime of murder, their presence will change the nature of the killing from homicide. It will become murder and will change the crime, the penalty from reclusion temporal. It will become reclusion perpetua to death penalty. Whatever be the kind of aggravating circumstance, for it to be considered by the court against the accused, it must be both alleged in the information and proven during trial. If it is not alleged in the information, but it is proven during trial, it cannot be appreciated by the court. It must be both alleged in the information and proven during trial. So what if A is prosecuted for the crime of homicide under a proper information for homicide? So the information is People versus A, criminal case number 12344 for homicide, violation of Article 249 of the RPC. So A is being prosecuted for an information that charges homicide. At the time of the trial, however, it was established that the crime, the act of killing, was done with treachery, with evident premeditation, with abuse of superior strength. Question: if you were the judge, of what crime would you convict A? Answer: if you were the judge, you have to convict A of the crime of homicide, the crime charged in the information. As the judge, you cannot appreciate the aggravating circumstances of treachery, evident premeditation, and abuse of superior strength, even if they were proven during trial, because these circumstances were not alleged in the information for homicide. Under the revised rules on criminal procedure, under your remedial law, under the revised rules on criminal procedure, it is expressly required that the elements of the crime as well as the qualifying and aggravating circumstances must be alleged in the information. The rules of court, the rules on criminal procedure require the qualifying circumstances to be specifically alleged in the information in order to comply with the constitutional right of the accused to be properly informed of the nature and cause of the accusation against him. The purpose is to allow the accused to prepare fully for his defense, to prevent surprises during trial, to allow the accused the opportunity to rebut the presence of this aggravating circumstance.